I have a story to tell. It takes place when I am alone in the Ruby Mountains, past Soldier Lake, and up the pass near Hidden Lake. I was alone on this trip, though I had been there before with friends. I carried a Glock 19 with 2 spare mags. Only the first mag had gold dots, while the others were FMJ. I figured that would be cheaper, and I would not need 60 rounds of ammo for anything. If I wanted to shoot, I did not want to waste my defensive ammo. This is a nice hike, it take about 4 hours to get in, and when you get up, it's a nice place, with plains and prairie at the top, surrounded by mountains. I took lots of pictures the first day, and I will post them as I go along. I have to resize them, and I am typing as I go along, so be patient. I will say this though. I will never return to those trails nor Hidden Lake. Pick is of a stream on the lower part of the trail. For those that don't know, Hidden Lake gets its name from the fact that it's up on a ridge, and can't be seen from the trails. It's a great camping and fishing spot. And the view is awesome. To get there, you hike up the Solitaire Pass Trail, and turn at the stick in the ground. It was a hot day, but I still decided to shoot up the trail for a 4-day weekend. I got to the top in about 3 to 5 hours or so, made pretty good time. I set up camp, which was just a pup tent, and set about making dinner. I had gotten stuck in Elko for the first part of the day, and when I had finished making the climb, it was starting to get late. I cooked dinner on the fire, and crash hard. The first couple nights pass without anything unusual happening. Spent the days dicking around, hiking, fishing, and relaxing. Things begin late in the night Saturday, my last night there. Pick is the stick you have to turn at. Saturday I am sitting on the lake's ridge, making my way over to a spring to refill my water bottle. The water here is glass clear, but everything gets the pills just in case. As I am walking, I hear this god-forsaken sound. Like dragging metal on cement. Just painfully loud and uncomfortable to hear. I looked around, but I could see no source. At this time, all the bugs and birds stopped making noise. There is always this background noise, right? You don't notice it, but it's there. I think was the only time I was ever aware of it. Because it all stopped, all I could hear was the spring. And my own breathing. I don't think I have ever felt that alone in my entire life. I would have killed to be able to hear the sound of a car engine or a horn or people talking. Anything but the silence. I was on the far side of the lake, near the snow outcrop in the picture when this happened. A good 10 to 15 minutes walk back if you are in a hurry. I filled my water bottle up, and headed back. The sounds of the animals returned, but I was still nervous. When I got back, my campsite was destroyed, including my bag. Everything was scattered everywhere, and it felt like a bomb had gone off. Everything was broken or rendered useless. Even silverware was bent and twisted. The fire, which less than an hour before was burning brightly, was as dead as if someone had dumped a bucket of water on it. Picture is of the lake. I stopped being nervous and started being pissed. I figured some kids had done it. I had not seen a soul since I made the climb, but that did not mean much. I started gathering my broken belongings. I had seen a nice fairy hole, a natural hole in rock along one of the ridges, and decided I would relocate my camp there. I got the fire burning again, and stuff that was unrepairable or useless I burned to save weight. As I went around cleaning up, I got this feeling. I am not quite sure how to describe it. Like you walked into someone's house without them being home, and they did not know you were there. Like you should not be there, but that is inadequate wording. I was getting nervous, and hurried up to the ridge. That's when I saw it first, a dark mass moving alongside the edge of the lake. Too far away to make out any details, but as I watched, I saw that it was following the same path that I had taken. It was thin though. Long and thin and dark. Now, I took the simplest path, so made it was just following that. But I feel that it was tracking me. Why would it need to go to a spring to drink, rather than a lake? I was starting to get a little unhinged when I saw it. I have been hunted by a mountain lion before, and the feeling I had then was just that, hunted. I was being stalked, but in a way, we were equals. Both cats and I are apex predators, and the tides could easily turn. When I saw this, any thought of killing it left my mind. I just wanted to run and hide. Run as fast and as hard as I could. I was prey. I could do nothing to this thing. The way it moved was so certain, so clean, that I knew I could not kill it. My gun that on the way up had made me feel so big felt like a toy. It moved between moving on 4 feet and 2. I hurried up the slope, and threw my stuff in the hole. I used rocks and the broken tent stakes and poles to barricade one end of it. The side that ended in a drop-off, and I pulled rocks and other debris to the other side. I curled up in a ball and lodged myself in the hole, clutching my pistol in one hand and a pocket knife in the other. I could hear rocks shifting outside, further down the slope. Last bit. I heard something get up the slope, and start squeaking around. It was the squeak mixed with a hiss. Though the few holes I had left, I could see flashes of dark matted fur. It had small dark eyes. Thin long snout, almost badger-like. Tapered. I could not breathe. I could hear claws clicking on the rocks not 10 feet away. It searched around outside for about half hour, and then left. The rest of the night I could hear rocks shifting as something moved around on them. I think it knew I was there, but did not see me as a threat of any kind. I never slept that night. In the morning I left, and have not been back since. Sorry, no epic combat ending, just me hiding. I don't like those mountains anymore. I don't know what lurks up there, in those thin passes. Maybe it was just a critter of some sort, and my imagination ran with it. I don't know. It sounds cliché, but going through these pictures made me kinda nervous by themselves. I don't like to tell this story, and it's the first time I told it to Kay. The feeling I had is what still shakes me up. I was prey. Nothing more, nothing less. Has anyone else heard of something strange in the rubies? I have only shared this one with a few people, and still when I think about it, it freaks me the fuck out. I was 16 or so, and growing up in a small town exploring out in the hills was the thing to do. This incident took place at the north end of Ruby Valley in Elko County, Nevada. Someday I will play around on Google Earth to try to find this place, but it is slightly north of the road off Highway 93 that goes into Ruby Valley. I always liked checking out old mineshafts and ghost towns. That shit really intrigues me. At the Burger Bar in Wells, Nevada, where I am from and grew up, they had these old turn-of-the-century maps under glass on the tables. On one of them it showed several ghost towns just north of Ruby Valley, so I figured I would go check them out, as I had not been in the area very often. I gassed up my '72 Dodge W200 pickup, and being a redneck AK, before 4chan even, I grabbed my HK91 and set out. I had found some old foundations in the lower country, and started heading into the mountains themselves and started finding abandoned mineshafts. Shit was pretty cool, so I kept going up. I took this ancient road that was no more than an overgrown cattle path by this point in history, and came upon a tree blocking the road. It was an old pinyon pine about 2 feet in diameter that blocked the road. After the tree the road continued straight for about 200 yards, then it hooked right before coming back 180 degrees. Continuing, gonna sketch up some key locations for the next post. I parked my truck in front of the tree, and set out on foot. I grabbed my HK91 with 120 round magazine in the rifle, and put 120 round mag in my back left pocket. I always had a rifle with me as I have encountered mountain lions in mineshafts before, and just generally I like to shoot shit. Get up on ridge lines and shoot boulders from a couple hundred yards away. Anyways. As soon as I climbed over the fallen tree I had a fucking creepy feeling as if I was being watched. I continued on for about 200 yards to the point where the road started curving right and gaining elevation, going towards the cabin. At this point I had the realization that not only did I feel like I was being watched, it was also dead fucking quiet out. This was in June or so, as school had just got out. Everywhere you went you could hear those fucking cicadas, but not here. It seemed as soon as I crossed the fallen tree, the mountains were silent, no bugs, no birds, nothing. Deafening silence. As I came up to the turn, there was this big fucking rock. The thing had to be about 15 feet in diameter. You could tell that it used to be on the road, but due to years of erosion, snow, and all that shit, it had slid down rust slightly off the road. It seemed to be red limestone, or something like that. It stood out since they are not that common in this area. I looked at the rock and you could tell that there were carvings in it at some point in time. Due to weathering though, whatever was carved on it had been worn off. I kept walking up the road, being creeped out like fuck, but I really wanted to check out the old cabin as it was pretty obvious no one had been here in quite a while. At this point I was probably 3 hours off-road to get to this point. You are going to be going through Wells, which is closer to where this happened. Probably about 30-ish miles south as the crow flies from there. After I post everything I will look on Google Maps and see if I can find this cabin on there. I got up to the cabin and as far as abandoned houses and cabins in Nevada go, this one was in pretty good shape. All of the glass on the windows was still intact, and there were remnants of curtains behind the windows. By this point there was something in the back of my mind telling me that I should be going. I went in the cabin, and that is where I started to get the feeling that something was off. Most cabins you find out in the middle of nowhere in Nevada are barren. Nothing really left, maybe a bit of broken furniture. This one was completely furnished. Time had taken its toll, but everything was still there. What was left of an old mattress and bedding was still there. There were plates and other cookware throughout the house, along with tattered clothing and personal effects such as a chest, faded pictures, and the like. What really creeped me the fuck out was the dinner table. It was set for 4 people. Dinner plate, glasses, and silverware. This was the first cabin I had ever found that was in this condition. It was as if whoever resided here had just up and left everything behind. I felt like I should not be in the cabin, and went outside to see if I could find the mineshaft or anything else. Once I was out the door, I decided to chamber around on my HK91. The sound of me racking around echoed through the canyon, and broke the silence. As little of a thing as it was, this calmed my nerves very slightly. Directly behind the cabin was a well. It was still intact, and as I got closer, it sounded like there was noise coming from it, like a slight breeze rustling through it. When I got within about 30 feet of it, I started to smell something. It smelled absolutely fucking putrid. Definitely something had died in the well. The smell of decay was heavy in the air, with an acrid copper scent that tore at my nostrils. I did not want to get any closer to the well, and started walking towards the left, where I could see the opening to a mineshaft up on the hill. The closer I got to it, I could start feeling a breeze coming out of it. This is not really uncommon if you have explored mineshafts before, as the breeze could be coming in from another opening of the mine, but the thing was, it was perfectly calm as far as I could see. There were no trees moving or any signs of wind. As I got closer, another thing that struck me as odd was the breeze coming out of the shaft was hot. Most of the time it is cool, as most mineshafts maintain a constant temperature. The closer I got to the shaft, the slower I moved towards it. Nothing since I crossed the fallen tree seemed right. The closer I got to the opening of the mineshaft, the more of a feeling of dread and being watched I got. I got within about 15 feet of the shaft when the fucking smell hit me. It was the smell of decay and copper, but much stronger than the well. Right then all of my spidey senses started going off. I had to get out of there. I started turning left to book it out of there when I saw a Dark shadow moving in the opening of the mineshaft. Whatever it was, it appeared to be crouched down to fit in the mineshaft. Most mineshafts I have been in have 8 to 10 feet ceilings. At first I thought it was a mountain lion, then I remembered how big the fucking shafts were. My mind raced trying to think what the fuck it was. It was too big to be a black bear, which are rare in Nevada. I nearly froze with panic, and it slowly kept coming towards the opening of the mineshaft. It was probably within 10 feet of the opening, and the light was starting to show whatever the fuck it was, covered from head to toe in grayish brown fur. Then it fucking screamed. It was unlike anything I have ever heard in my fucking life. My ears were ringing from it. I flipped into panic mode and did what any good redneck would do. I fucking shot it. I pulled up my HK-91, placed the front blade on what appeared to be its center mass, and ripped off 5 rounds as fast as I could accurately shoot. If you have ever shot big game with a large caliber rifle, you know the sound when you connect with something. I had 4 solid T-5 and 1 round that went high. This made it scream even louder than it had, in pain. At this time I started hearing more, and separate screams coming from over in the well, and in the hills above the mineshaft. I started running down the hill as fast as I fucking could. In the tree line above the road, approximately 75 to 125 yards, I could see fast movement. Rocks were tumbling down the hill and there were several other screams. From the mineshaft I could hear the wailing of whatever the fuck I had shot. Whatever it was, I had definitely connected and it was hurting. Whatever it was up in the tree line, they were running from tree to tree on all fours, getting closer to me. As I ran towards the rock I was shooting in the general vicinity of the movement on the top of the hill. By the time I got to the limestone rock, I had expended the 20-round mag in the rifle. I ripped it out and put in my spare magazine, chambered around, and started sprinting towards the fallen tree, approximately 200 yards away by now. I kept glancing back and whatever they were staying in the trees. I could make out their masses and fur, but they would not stay in the open. I got back to the fallen tree and ate shit trying to jump over it. I got up off my ass, fired between 12 to 15 rounds at the closest movement, which was approximately 50 yards away from now. I heard a few rounds connect and it started screaming louder. Between the screaming and gunshots, my ears were damned near deer. I opened the door of my truck and got the fuck in and started it up as fast as I could. Backing up to turn around, I damned near put my truck down in the canyon. As I started going forward, to leave on the road I came in on was when I finally got a look at one of them. It was crouched over with its front feet on the tree. It was covered from head to toe in grayish brown fur, with long slender fingers with claws tipping off the fingers. The back of it was hunched, and the face was slender, most closely resembling that of a badger, but with sunken-in eyes. It was shaking its head back and forth, and it sounded like it was attempting to speak, but it was so garbled, and with the noise of my truck I could not make out what the fuck it was. I averaged 50 to 60 miles per hour on a shitty dirt road that I had done 15 on the way in. I did not slow down or stop until I got back to pavement. By now I was so shaken I had to stop and collect myself. I got back to town and was in a bit of shock. My dad had been a guide in the Ruby Mountains for about 20 years. He asked me how my trip went, and where I went. He could tell that I was startled, and asked where I had been. I told him that I had been north of Ruby Valley. He got quiet and asked if I had seen a cabin with a tree fallen over the road. I told him yes. He looked me in the eyes and told me that is somewhere I should never go again, especially alone. We never spoke about it again after that. I have never been back there. Part of the reason is I live in western Nevada now. But in the back of my mind there is something that is telling me I should go back. And one day I do want to go back. This was back in 2001, before camera phones, and I was too broke to afford a digital camera. I want to go back with a camera, preferably a GoPro on my helmet, and with several friends that are armed. Just something about there, even with the shit I experienced, is drawing me back. One day, I will go back. I guess I need closure on what happened that day. I will probably be on for another 30 minutes or so if anyone has any questions. After that, I can be reached by email. Stand by, I will sketch it up. My drawing skills are shit, so it will be rough. Definitely want to make it back out there with at least 4-5 people well fucking armed, that is for damn sure. Still to this day it gives me goosebumps thinking about this shit. I tried researching it a bit a few years past, asking some old timers, and one of them told me a story about the rubies. I will be quick on it. During the 40s and 50s the Army Air Corps operated out of the Wendover Air Base. Every now and then during shit weather a B-25, B-17, or B-29 would smack the rubies due to poor visibility. Some of the local ranchers got recruited to help the military go up to a crash site during the winter to recover the bodies. Rancher I was talking to told me that it took them about 3 days to get up to where this crash was on horseback and recover the bodies. He said when they got to the wreckage, all of the crew members were laid out side by side, next to each other in a clearing in the wreckage. Many of them had severed limbs and it was apparent all died on impact. Somehow, they ended up laid out next to each other. This was at nearly 10,000 feet elevation too.
Possible map locations of the northern Nevada encounters via Google Earth. More possible locations. Map sources.
Hello X. I'm visiting from K, and would like to tell you a story in regards to some of my recent adventures. There are no skeletons in closets, dinosaurs walking, or trips to Bel Air. I'm not a writer by any means either, so please forgive me if my writing style isn't the greatest. Whether this story is paranormal, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or man-made, I'll leave up to you, as I still cannot decide for myself. You see, I like to fancy myself as a survivalist, or prepper for some of you. I live in Envy, about an hour outside of Las Vegas. For certain reasons I'm keeping the exact location secret, and purposely distorting some details. For those of you that don't know, a good 90% of Nevada is government or military-owned land. A lot of it is free to roam though. The only areas that you really shouldn't venture to, are well fenced, and clearly marked, for good reasons really. There are many still active, radioactive sites, as well as government testing facilities, bombing ranges, and other things of that nature. They really aren't that exciting to be quite honest, and usually only have some concrete foundations, or target shacks on them, and are probably hazardous to your health or safety at that. The sites that aren't, are usually fully manned military bases where they cock about with drones. Now, I've never been one to believe in paranormal phenomenon. At best, I acknowledge that our government has several high-tech projects they keep veiled, but what I experienced has really made me question these beliefs. I digress however. Also, just a disclaimer, not all of these pictures are mine, because I didn't bring a camera with me. This story started about a month ago, around on a warm spring night. Yes, it starts warming up early out here. When you were all getting snow, it was hitting about 80 F during midday. I had vacation time I had yet to cash in on, and it was nearing the point of expiration. So I took it, not really having any plans, or foresight into what I wanted to do with my 2 weeks off. I did however take some of my savings, and cashed in on an IR laser for my rifle and a night vision monocular headset. The first night of my vacation, I felt somewhat restless, so I started up my Minecraft server, and played around for a bit, still feeling unsatisfied. I have always had trouble sitting still, knowing there's nothing to be productive with. My mind goes racing, coming up with hundreds of project ideas. I finally settled on the idea of camping. Unfortunately, most of my friends were busy with the drudgery of work, and no one I knew was willing to get away for the week. It dawned on me that I had never tried camping for a lengthy period of time, alone, for good reason though. The desert is a nasty place to get stranded, and death is a very real possibility, should something go terribly wrong. Between dehydration, broken bones, and rattlesnakes, you definitely have to be careful. The only thing I could really think of to combat this, would be to take along my 5W ham radio, and research the closest repeaters to different choice areas I have, to call for help if things went south, and my Yugo M76 just in case. Damn text limits, but this is a long story, and I promise to post it all. After doing some research and quick site planning, I settled on an area I honestly didn't know very well, but looked promising. It has several abandoned silver mines, washes for shelter, and generally good wildlife to watch or take potshots at. Of course, if anyone from PETA got wind of my ventures, they would have an absolute shitstorm over the number of jackrabbits and coyotes I've laid waste to. So once settling on my location, I begin to pack. This wasn't difficult, as I always keep my bug-out bag ready in my closet, and decided it was a good time to cycle out old inventory. This time was a bit different though. I decided to bring a few more electronics with me than usual, including my ham radio, my night vision monocular, and a solar charger just in case. I decided to leave my cell phone behind, and rely on a good old-fashioned map and compass for navigation. From an early age in Boy Scouts, I've known how to navigate the old-fashioned way, and decided I'd give my rusty skills a bit of a test, and see how well I remembered the UTM coordinate system. The electronics were for some nighttime fun, and emergencies only. I woke up at 3:30 a.m., day 2 of my vacation. I was excited as hell, and ready to head out. I decided to load up on crap before hitting the highway, and stopped and got some coffee and donuts, looking like some ridiculous /K/Amando on a dirt bike. After getting my sweet black nectar, and a load of simple carbs, I headed off. The weather was great, and the wind rushing over my face felt wonderful. As I got a few miles away from the turn-off, I remembered there was an Indian gas station fairly close to the exit as well. The Indian reservation boundaries are an odd shape, and for about a mile, the highway went right through the middle of it, offering anyone who stopped in some tax-free gasoline. I stopped in after topping off my tank, and the cashier asked where I was off to. I told her where I was going, and was just planning to go camping. She mentioned the Air Force base a few miles away had been doing some testing, and warned me not to get lost on their target range. This is definitely something to take seriously, as they do drop live ordnance. I thanked her for the advice, and headed out. It was early morning, and I continued to enjoy the feeling of wind on my face, and the liberating feeling of being able to break free of any social obligations. I reached the turn-off area, where it was all dirt/gravel from there on. I performed a quick test on my ham radio, set the repeater offset, and verified the reception was clear. The dial tone registered, and I got a familiar weather forecast for the day. I was ready to begin. I headed down the dirt trail, and soldiered on through the bumps and washes. My bike frantically kicked up dust and rocks, until I finally reached a couple fork points in the trail. At this point, I couldn't quite remember which direction I was supposed to go, as I had only been in the area once before with a friend and he drove. I looked at my map, and got what I believed to be a good bearing, and headed off down the trail. Now, when I say trail, these are more like gravel roads that sometimes end, or bring you to a military base encampment, or some of the other small encampments around the state, or wildlife preserves, or even BLM land and campsites. Accidentally venturing to a military one isn't a huge deal, they'll usually just turn you around or wave you off. So I wasn't too horribly concerned about a run-in with anything unless you're up near Groom Lake, but that's a different beast. After driving down this particular trail for a while I realized I'm lost. None of the landscape looked familiar, and I had traveled a good 25 miles before reaching anything that looked like a decent campsite. I had packed plenty of water and food, so I wasn't concerned about finding a spring or anything edible. I had also remembered the way in which I came, so that wasn't really an issue either. At this point, I just decided it was adventure time, and drove on for a while, until I found a campsite I decided was suitable for a short stay. I ended up settling at the base of a mountain, near a dried-up wash. It was a pretty nice area, and there were quite a few Joshua trees and trenches to set up in, for some decent afternoon shade. It wasn't rainy season at this point, so the threat of a flash flood taking me out wasn't really a concern either. After getting set up, I threw on my camel pack, grabbed my rifle, and filled my flask with a bit of vodka just for fun. I was my own man now, and had to answer to no one. I walked around a bit, heard the familiar sounds of cicada, and headed towards another dry wash bed near the base of the mountain. After walking for a bit, I quickly became bored and took a swig of vodka. Sometimes it can take a bit to just detach from normal life and relax. I decided after my drink, it was time to start setting up targets, and push my Yugo M76 to its limits. After setting up a few targets, I was good to go. I walked back to my campsite, identifying local plant life, and inspecting oddly shaped rocks, not really in any hurry. I stirred up a jackrabbit on the way back, who was less than happy to see my presence in the valley. I shouldered my rifle, to take a pot shot at it, and then noticed something in the corner of the scope. I adjusted the zoom, and got a closer look. It was a freshly killed coyote. I decided to let our little rabbit friend go, and headed towards the seared carcass. The closer I got, the more pungent the air became. The smell of rotting meat was heavy. When I got closer to it, two things struck me as slightly odd. Number one, the pelt wasn't completely removed, but what had been, was fairly clean. There weren't any missing extremities. Coyotes are considered a nuisance, so you can shoot them freely, but usually grabbing the pelt/tail/paw is common. Number two, it didn't look like there had been any entry or exit wounds from a bullet. Being a bit confused, I just wrote it off as a sloppy hunter who had found a coyote dead of natural causes, and was scamming some farmer offering bounties on hides. Sometimes cannibalism happens in coyote packs, but it's not very common. I made it back to camp, started myself a fire, drank down a shot or two more of liquid courage, and settled on taking pot shots at the targets I set up. I tinkered around, adjusted my scope, and tried taking the longest shots I could. I made a few accurate shots out to 700 m, and decided I had pushed my rifle as I could in my slightly buzzed state. Yes, I know guns plus alcohol equals bad, but I wasn't exactly in a crowded area either, nor completely shit-faced. After letting the rifle cool down for a bit, and breaking open one of my mres, I began cleaning it. After several failed attempts at keeping it 100% dust-free, I gave up, and just did a quick field cleaning. It may not have passed the white glove test, but it would damn sure work if I needed it. After a nice 5-star MRE meal, I decided to break out my ham radio and turned it on, seeing if there were any other hams in the area. I scanned the stations, and didn't really come across anything of interest, except for a few rangers reporting their status. I decided I'd do something that you're really not supposed to do, and started scanning the capped channels. For those that don't know, the military operates on Mars capped channels, which have a very high frequency, higher than VHF, so please forgive the reference. You can eavesdrop on them with the right radio modifications, and as long as you don't broadcast, you should be fine. I started scanning these channels, and came across a bit of chatter. They didn't seem to have much to say either, except area status reports. After a bit, I started getting bored listening to them all report on 10 to 100s, and turned off my radio. As dusk was turning to darkness, I sat for a while, just letting myself go into a trance staring at the fire. As I decided another drink was in order, I began to hear a bit of crackling coming from my bag. I grabbed my bag, assuming some critter Hyla monster had decided to make itself a new home, and instead, found my radio turned on slightly. I turned it up a bit, and realized that the sounds I was hearing were short bursts of what sounded like gunfire over the radio. Intrigued, I turned it up, and listened into whatever testing/war games were going on. As I listened into the action, I heard what can only be described as fingernails on a chalkboard, coupled with a blood-curdling scream, and a bit of dying rabbit mixed in. As I reached for the knob to turn the volume down, I heard a pop, and then silence. My radio had gone out or blown a capacitor, and I was now without any form of communication. I sat there in silence for a moment, wondering if coming out here wasn't the best idea. After thinking about it for a moment, and a bit of self-reassurance that I was just picking up chatter from 100 miles away, I decided that I was just letting small, stupid things like the coyote carcass, and the radio chatter get to me. For all I knew, it was just some war game being played, and new equipment being tested. I decided it was time to get some sleep, and I'd do a bit more exploring in the morning. I took one more swig, and crawled into my tent for a bit of sleep. As I awoke the next morning, and crawled out of my tent, I felt like death. My back ached, and I was incredibly groggy and slow-moving. I restarted the fire, filled up my mess kit pot with water, and started boiling it while pulling out some instant coffee. I decided that today I was going to do a bit of riding around and exploring. I looked at my radio lying next to my tent, and thought, guess I better be careful. After a morning coffee, and MRE eggs and bacon, I grabbed my rifle, and headed out to see if I could see any signs of life or find any old abandoned equipment or buildings. I biked up a natural trail, and came over a ridge, to a large stretch of open valley and land. Off in the distance, I could see the beginning of a military base's fence. When I saw this, I felt an incredible sinking feeling in my chest. Whatever was going on last night may very well have been happening just a few miles off. I shook off the feeling, and decided that I was just letting anxiety and my imagination get to me. I just told myself again that it was only war games, and that some noise was probably getting through the channels. I decided to just avoid the area, and rode back towards the campsite over the lower mountain ridge. As I had turned back, I noticed something off in the distance, on the side of the mountain face. It was what looked like an abandoned silver mine, or a natural cave of sorts. At this point, my curiosity got the better of me, and I shook off all fear I may have once had. Now I could actually do a bit of exploration. I rode up to the side, dismounted, grabbed my night vision and rifle, and peeked in. I couldn't tell how deep it was, but it seemed more man-made than anything. The rocks looked roughly carved, but I'm not a geologist either. I couldn't really smell or hear anything, so I decided to walk in a bit further. I put on my night vision, and waited for my eyes to adjust from bright desert sun to darkness. After a second my eyes adjusted, and I turned on my monocular. There wasn't much to be seen. I walked for a ways, but still no signs of anything that would excite anyone other than a geologist. I could see what looked like a turn a bit further back and decided against going too far in, since I wasn't experienced in spelunking. That's when something hit me. There is a primal fear everyone has, people debate what it is, or how we acquired it as a species, but it's there. It's a deep feeling of dread, like you are being watched or stalked by something horrific. Chills crawl up your body, and you feel that something just isn't right. Well, I felt this, and immediately froze, rifle in hand, pointing down into the cave. I couldn't hear anything, nor could I see anything. I then, however, quickly realized what was wrong. The smell. It was the same pungent smell the coyote carcass was letting off. It seemed too rotten, too pungent, and too strong for just a coyote carcass. Even in the sun, it just seemed odd, but now I could smell it in the cave. This set off every alarm in my mind, and every ounce of fear in me told me to GTFO of there. I slowly backed out, while shouldering my rifle, pointing it towards the back of the cave. Every rock under my boot sounded 100 times louder, and every breath I took felt like it echoed through the entire cave. As I reached the entrance, I just turned and bolted for my bike. I started up, and rode back as quickly as possible. I was taking no chances now, and decided it was probably best to leave. Dusk started setting in as I was riding back, and I was contemplating just moving to a new site, or calling the trip off 2 days in. I still wasn't sure if any of this meant anything, or if I had just been overreacting, but I knew that some odd things had been happening. As I rode closer to my campsite, I noticed everything seemed off. As though nothing was how I left it. I was feeling really uneasy now, but wasn't about to leave my expensive equipment behind. As I got closer, I realized why everything seemed off. My campsite had been raided. My tent was torn, my mess kit was strewn about, the fire pit had been scattered, and my pack had been dumped out. I assessed the damage and realized something: nothing was missing, just vandalized. Even my radio, solar charger, and extra ammo remained. Stuff I was sure would be missing. My decision was made, I was calling it quits. I started packing up my bag, and whatever I could scavenge that hadn't been ripped up. This was about the time I noticed something else. There were no sounds at all. No cicada, no crickets, no birds, just complete and deafening silence. As I was packing, I quickly drained my flask to calm my nerves. Nothing at this point could have changed my mind about leaving. It was quickly becoming dark, and even with night vision and a rifle, whatever was out here was obviously screwing with me now. It was obvious this territory belonged to someone or something else, and my hunting trip turned tables on me. As it got darker, I decided to scan the area first, to make sure my surroundings were clear. As I looked around, I couldn't see much other than the familiar desert landscape. As I began to scan the area near the peak of the mountain, I saw something move. It was just visible behind a rocky area. I tried to make out the shape, but it was distorted and hidden by some larger rocks. I stared in that direction for what seemed like hours. Then, it stood up. To this day, I will not forget the sheer terror and fear I felt while looking at this thing. It's as though death and evil itself was staring right at me, and every part of my mind screamed, this cannot be real. This bipedal creature stood as though it was human, but the eyes were massive. Just massive blank, dark spots in my night vision. No reflection or gleam came from them. I couldn't distinguish any real features other than what seemed like a scaly texture. It just stood, and looked in my direction, as though it knew I was watching it. Then it did something that nearly made me piss myself. It smiled. It was not a normal smile, it was a terrible, jagged tooth, Joker grin smile. I took the safety off my rifle, and shined the IR laser at it. After a brief pause, I delivered a fatal 8mm round to its head, or so I thought. The shriek that followed was deafening, blood-curdling, and absolutely terrible to hear. It was a scream that went straight into your should, and shattered it to bits. The dying screams of someone getting their head sawn off with a rusty Taliban blade would have been comforting at this point. I watched this thing shake, and shudder for a moment, and quickly delivered another round in its direction. I think I hit center mass, but couldn't be sure. It ran, at a pace I'm not even sure my bike could keep up with, down the ridge. Not quite in my direction, but too close for comfort. I bolted down into the wash, and kept my gun trained in its direction as best I could while running. I ducked into a small crevice, and waited. I could hear grunts and screeches in the distance, At first they seemed to move closer, and then further away. It was difficult to tell where the noises were coming from, but in the pitch blackness, I sure as shit wasn't going anywhere with that thing around. I stayed up all night, crouched in a crevice in the side of the wash, just waiting. Gun trained at the opening, and kept awake only by adrenaline. It was the most exhausting and terrifying night of my life. Dawn broke, and I hadn't heard any signs of the thing. It had been a good few hours since I took the first shot, but I waited until the daylight was strong to even think about moving from my spot. As the sun rose, and the familiar sounds of wildlife returned, I felt safe enough to venture from my spot. Very carefully, I crept out, covered in dust and feeling incredibly drained. I emerged. I looked around to see if anything was around. There were no signs of whatever the hell was hunting me last night, so I decided to man up and head to my bike. I didn't even think to grab my equipment, I just slung my rifle on my shoulder, and very reluctantly started the bike, fearing whatever came last night would hear me. After running it for about a minute, and no signs of movement were seen, I decided to carefully start heading out. Before that though, I had a thought. I wondered what may have been left behind where I scored a hit on the thing. I decided to check it out, since everything seemed clear. I drove up the ridge in DEFCON 1, scanned the area, just to make sure it wasn't watching or following me. I got up to the rocky area where I first saw it hiding at, and found a nice bit of blood splatter. I quickly grabbed a handful of earth and dried blood, and then booked it the hell out of the area. As I was driving down the trail, I started feeling as though I was being watched again. I only drove faster, and didn't look back. After I got home, out about $500 worth of gear, keeping only my rifle, a couple magazines worth of ammo, and my night vision goggles, I decided to get to the bottom of this. I called up a friend of mine who works for the local university, and told her the situation. I didn't exactly go into detail, but I explained that I had been hunting, and shot something I wasn't sure of, that had attacked me. She had me bring her the blood-stained rocks, and I guess ran some DNA tests on them. She got back to me after about a month, and basically told me I don't know what the hell this DNA is. And explained to me that it only partially matched a few animals. Here's where everything gets really weird. I got a call from, well, I don't really know who, to be honest. They referenced my camping, and said it was best I just forget about it. I've also noticed a few people tailing me while driving, and leapfrogging me on a regular basis, trading off following shifts. That's it really. I'm not sure where else to go from here. I'm sorry I can't really bring much closure, but now you know as much as I do.